Matthew chapter 6. All right. Last week we're still on multiple masters. Matthew chapter 6:24. And how we got here. Because right after this, right after Matthew 6:19 to 24, Jesus starts verse 25. And from 25 to the end of the chapter, he gives us 7 reasons why we're not to worry. But he starts the whole worried part of the 6th chapter with one word: therefore. And you have to remember, when you see a therefore, you better know what it's there for. Because it's not there by accident. The reason we worry is because we haven't got down the principles that Jesus has been laying down in Matthew chapter 6. Our heart is in too many places. Our vision is divided, and we're focused on too many things. And we have too many masters. And because of that reason, we're worried. We allow life to confuse us and to worry us and everything else. Now, again, going towards the next series on the virtuous woman, the 2 types of women in the church, or the 2 types of churches, really. The Bible tells us in Proverbs 31, verse 21, it says that this virtuous woman, this church, she is not afraid. She is not full of worry. She is not overtaken with fear. She has no anxiety for her household because of the snow. And we know what snow is. Snow is those wonderful winter seasons that none of us like, that none of us wish we ever went through, but we do. Why? Because Genesis 8, verse 22 says that as long as the earth is involved and continues to rotate, there are going to be summer times, but there are also going to be winter times. And you're not stopping. So why was this woman, why wasn't she worried? Because of her household. Why wasn't she worried? You know why? Because she spent time preparing her membership, getting them ready, teaching them the principles that it takes so that they won't be afraid, worry, have anxiety when things come upon their life. Jesus lays down, therefore, and he tells us, and Ryan covered it this morning in the first service with his offering thought. I got so excited because I just love it when everything comes together. And he used Matthew chapter 6, and he used Matthew verse 24, and he used it for history when Cortez went and his army went to take on the Aztecs, and he was so worried that his army would retreat that you know what he did, according to Coach Ryan, he had his leadership burn the ships. Why? So they couldn't go back. So they couldn't look back. So that they could only go one way, forward, because there was nothing for them in the back. Why? So they would be single-hearted. So that they would only have one mission. And Jesus tells us the exact same thing. You got to be single-hearted. You can't have your heart fixed on the world, and you can't have your heart fixed on God Because your life will follow your heart. If your heart is confused, your life will be confused. If your heart is focused on too many things, your life will be focused on too many things. Proverbs 4:23. For out of the heart flow all the issues of life. Everything flows from your heart. So Jesus starts this entire series on how we're not to worry by telling us you better make sure where your heart is. Because where your heart is, that is where your life will eventually end up. Not overnight, but that's where it'll end up. If your heart is bent on the things of this world, then you will be concerned about the things of this world. They will control you, and eventually you will do nothing but worry and fear because of what is happening in the world today. But if your heart is totally, completely fixed, on God, then you will understand that He has everything under control. You know, we say that, but we don't believe that. God has everything under control. Then why, when something happens in our life, do we panic? Do we get scared? Do we worry? Do we get worked up? We sing the song, we used to sing it, the steps of a righteous man are ordered of the Lord. He will rejoice in them. Do we? Do we rejoice in our steps? Do we rejoice when we wake up and all of a sudden something happens that we didn't count on? No. We don't. Because we really don't believe that God is in charge. Do you understand that nothing happens in your life that hasn't been planned by God? The Bible tells us that. And He wrote it all down. We think the devil's more powerful than God because that's what the world teaches us. No. The devil can't do nothing in your life unless God gives him permission. How do we know that? We know it from the book of Job. So God said, get your heart focused on me. Keep your heart focused on me. I'm in charge. I'm in control. I have everything under control. And then He says, because your heart is totally focused on me, then you'll have a single vision. And when you have a single vision, guess what? Everything in your life is full of light. Because your heart is in the right place, your whole life will be full of light. And then guess what? You'll serve and do the right things. Why? Because serve, in verse 24, no man can serve. It means your will. It means your actions. You can't serve the devil and you can't serve God. You can't serve heavenly treasures and you can't serve earthly treasures. You can't pursue both. You weren't made that way. I'm not made that way. And what happens, and what we will spend the rest of this time in the study guide studying, is that every time we forget that principle, we start to worry. We start to fear. We become over anxious because something has gone wrong in our life. And we forgot that God is still in charge, and we become focused on what is going wrong in our lives. And we have taken our eyes off of God and put them on what is going wrong in our life, and we have a double vision. And we're all worked up. Why? Because Jesus said you have to have a single vision. You have to stay focused on God. You have to keep your eyes focused on Him, regardless of what is happening in your life. Now, on June 9th, I'm preaching on June 9th, and it's simply this: right place, right time. And it's the life of Joseph. Do you know why Joseph was in the right place at the right time? Because God orchestrated his entire life. That's what he told his brothers. He said, don't be upset. God brought me here. God used you to put me here at the right time and for the right place so that I could save our people. God did it, not you. God did it. And the entire time, from the pit to Potiphar's house to the prison, do you know what Joseph's eyes were focused? On God. Totally. Not on his circumstances. Not on everything that went wrong in his life. Joseph understood that God was in total control. So everywhere he was, from the pit to Potiphar's house to the prison, he was blessed. And everything he touched was blessed. Because he had a single vision. I'm not here because my brothers hate me. I wasn't sold into slavery because my brothers didn't like me. I wasn't thrown into prison because Potiphar's wife lied about me. I am where I am because God meant it to be. God. He had a single vision. So guess what? He didn't worry about it. He didn't fear about where he was. He didn't fear about his life falling apart. And so Jesus warns us that it begins with the heart. And you've got to guard your heart. Why? Because if your heart is wrong, eventually that is where you're going to end up. I got news for you. You don't end up not speaking to your family overnight for years. It builds up by the first step, by not doing the right thing. We're always waiting for somebody else to do the right thing. No, God tells you to do the right thing and let their disobedience be his problem. You do the right thing. Well, I didn't do nothing wrong. It doesn't say who did something wrong. Do the right thing. Let your obedience be right and let God deal with their disobedience. You do the right thing, Paul tells the Corinthian church. But we don't. We know what's right, just like Pastor Jim talked about it this morning. The general will of God. You know? We don't have to ask, is it right to steal? And yet I stand amazed at all the people that when we were with Kenneth Hagin that used to write Kenneth Hagin and said they don't understand what went wrong. They asked God to bless their venture, and the police caught them stealing, and now they're in prison. Well, duh. Thou shalt not steal. You don't have to ask God, will you bless me while I rob this bank? No. But people do. We do it. How Pastor Gary used to always say, what? It's easier to ask for forgiveness than to do what's right. Oh, I'll just do it and then I'll ask God to forgive me. Well, eventually that's going to catch up with you. And so Jesus tells his church, guard your heart, because that's where it all starts. It all starts here. And if this goes wrong, your thinking will go wrong. When your thinking goes wrong, your talk will go wrong. When you start talking the wrong way, then you'll start acting the wrong way. And so Jesus said it all follows that principle. It's the principle. Why? Because Jesus is showing his church the demands of his kingship. Because the religious world at that time were serving two things. They were serving. That's what we talked about. That's what Kingsley wrote in the opening paragraph on our cover page of this chapter. that Jesus was trying to teach the religious leaders that you can't serve and you can't be devoted to two things. Because eventually those two things will come in conflict with one another. And every person in every age thinks that they're the exception to the rule. They can break what has happened before and be the exception and live with both feet in both kingdoms. And guess what? You can't. You can't. We see it in government. We talked about it last week. I shared it this morning in the office. That when will we learn? The article in the magazine. Socialism every time leads to a dictatorship, which leads to death. When will we learn that we are not smarter, we are not better, we don't have a better plan? Once you start down this road, it ends every single time in dictatorship and death. Oh, not overnight, but eventually. We're not going to change the course that history has proven. You know, they used to say, the only thing we learn from history is that we don't learn from history. We don't learn. Who said something?
I said it repeats itself.
Yeah, history repeats itself. Why? Because we don't learn the lessons.
And there's a scripture somewhere in the New Testament that says these things were given as an example for you.
Oh yeah, they were there. And we shared last week the Christmas song. You know, who would have thought? But and there's a line in that Christmas song that who would have thought this little boy would grow up to, or this little baby would grow up to be a king. But it talks about fools who exercise their right to justify their sins. And then it goes on to say, and every nation that has fallen from within. Every nation. And look at the moral direction our nation is going in. The same direction every other nation that has fallen is going in. Why? Because righteousness exalts the nation. Not its rules, not its financial institutions, not its business practices. Righteousness. But I will tell you, when a nation is righteous, it will prosper. When a nation is righteous, it'll do good. The people, what the Bible say? The rulers will be right. When the rulers are right, the people are happy. Why? Because righteousness exalts the nation. And all we got, just like Carolyn said, just look at the nation of Israel. When Jerusalem was right, when the temple was right, when the priests were right, when the people worshiped correctly, the nation was blessed. They lived in peace. They were unbeatable, unstoppable. And everybody was taken care of. When the heart of the nation, the religious center of the nation, fell apart, guess what followed? The nation. Why? Because the Bible was true. Righteousness exalts the nation. Not its business practices. But righteousness will determine its business practices. But enough. That's my sidelight. But everybody thinks that we can serve too. We are Lot. You know, everybody says don't forget Lot's wife. Don't forget Lot, which is a better thing. Because Lot isn't Lot's wife. Because you know what Lot's wife did? Lot's wife went back to her old ways. Not Lot. Lot took the easy way. He played the middle ground. He got stuck in the middle. He wasn't hot and he wasn't cold. He was lukewarm. How do I know? Because God, the angel, told him, get up into the mountains. and get as far away from this as you can. He said, that's too hard, that's too far, and it's too strenuous. How about if I just go over here on this little plain? It's real close, and it's simple, and it's easy. See, because Lot had both feet in both worlds. And you can't do it. You can't. Jesus said it. And Jesus spends all this time showing us the progression. And over 2,000 years later, Kingsley said, we still haven't learned the lesson. That we think we can serve God and we can serve mammon. And mammon just isn't money. Mammon is everything that pertains to this world. Everything. Everything. And Jesus said this spirit, it's infectious. F. This spirit of covetousness possesses the world and the church alike. All people are infected by this spirit. Because we live here. And Jesus said, if you don't work, you don't eat. So we got to work. But we put too much emphasis on the work part. And we don't put enough emphasis on the God part. And then once we start putting all our emphasis over there, we see all the movies, especially the Hallmark movies. How many people look back over their lives and realize that they spent their entire life doing nothing but working, but they didn't mean to start out that way. They meant to start out to provide for their family, and they started working, and they became so consumed that they looked back over their lives. They missed their childhood. They missed their children. They missed their family. They've lost everything. And it didn't start out that way. And that's what Jesus said. You can't, and Pastor Jim read it, don't give the devil any place. Pastor Gary used to say, if the devil can get a toehold before he's finished, it'll be a stronghold. And when you invite him to sit in the passenger seat of your car, thank you, Lord, it won't be long before he's the driver and you're the passenger. And so we have to be on our guard. We have to be on our guard. That's why over and over again, I stand amazed. Over and over again, how many times it tells us to guard our heart, to watch and pray. Watch and pray. Watch and pray. Watch and pray. And so we got to be careful because we're all susceptible to this. And I just love, most people didn't get it, but I loved Pastor Jim's comment this morning that we all have baggage that after we get saved, we all still have baggage that we bring to Jesus Christ because we're not fully, completely sanctified. And if you don't, your number one baggage is pride. I thought that was great because we all have baggage. We're all susceptible to all of this. He didn't pick up 2 disciples and leave the other 10 go. Say, okay, you 10 over here. Or Peter and John, you guys are good. Or James, no, you're good. You don't have to worry about this. But let me focus on you 10. No. It starts out by teaching all his disciples. Why? Because if we're not careful, we're all susceptible to fear, to worry, to anxiety. We're all susceptible to it. And where does it start? It starts somewhere down the road. We allowed our heart to get focused on the wrong things. I mean, when 9/11 hit, I can tell you how many people at the post office lost thousands. Thousands. I mean, my one friend in one day lost $35,000 in her retirement account. Just like that. Gone. Just gone. And other people were running around screaming and yelling and worrying, what are they going to do? She was total, complete peace. Why? Because that retirement account wasn't her source. God was. And she just knew that before she would need to retire, God was going to take care of everything. She didn't know how. But it wasn't on that. She had a single focus. And it was on God. And that's what he said. So we got to be careful. We got to be careful. Because this is what Jesus said. No man. I'll never forget it. Pastor Jim talked about it this morning. Again, the first time we came here, Mercy's 34, so we came in. She was born in April. We came here first weekend in May, right after she was born. And Randy stood up, and I tell him all the time, I remember this as plain as day. This is what he said. He said, do you know what all means in the Greek? All. All. And Jesus said, no man. No man. No man. And if you think you are, you're full of pride. And he that thinketh he standeth, what's the Bible say? Take heed lest he falls. If you're the one that thinks you're going to break the mold, guess what? You're going to be the first one that's going to fall. Why? Because that's what the Bible teaches us. He that thinketh he can stand is going to fall. Jesus said, no man, nobody. Not Billy Graham, not Kenneth Hagin, not Kenneth Copeland. No man. I don't care how big your faith is. I don't care how long you served Jesus Christ. I don't care how many times you can quote the scripture. No man. No man can serve two masters. You can only serve one. And it points to the fact of a slave. A slave can only serve one master. You know, and it says here traditional reading is untrue. Society and people do it all the time. We hold two jobs and everything else. But you know what? Eventually, that will rise up to get you too. I see it at work all the time because RD carriers only work, like my sub only works one day out of 2 weeks. And there are some that don't work any day. So they have other jobs on the side. And they get hired at the post office, and post office lets them work both jobs. And eventually it starts out good, but eventually, you know what? It ends up getting to a place where it's in conflict. And then you have to decide. I'll never forget when I first started at the post office. They can't do this now. But I was teaching because I was a teacher first. And then God moved me into being a postal worker. But I was a teacher, and I was teaching a math class at Cochran Junior High School at the time. And my boss called me. And so I got over the intercom, got called down to the principal's office, and I had to take this phone call. And I said, well, I'm teaching math. My boss said, well, let me tell you right now. You have 2 minutes to decide right now. Do you want to be a teacher? Or do you want to be a mailman? You can't do both. You can't give your heart to two places. What do you want to be? I said, well, if you don't mind me delivering mail in a suit, I'll be right there. And I went to work. I had my suit pants on, my shirt, my white colored shirt, took the tie off, took my jacket off, and I delivered mail. Because it's true. You can't serve two masters. You can't. You can't be a slave to two masters. Why? Because you will either love the one and hate the other one. Or Jesus says, you will despise the one and honor the other one. That word slave. See, a master is someone who has purchased you. And Jesus purchased each and every one of us by his blood. See, the woman in Proverbs, the virtuous church, she's not anxious because of her household. You know why? Because they are clothed, they are covered, they are wrapped in scarlet. And scarlet means a couple things. But scarlet, number one, means the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. But it also means the blood of Jesus. And she wasn't worried because she taught her church that they were purchased by Jesus Christ. He was their master. They were his bondslaves. And they were totally to be committed to him and to him alone. And that's what a slave is. A slave don't work a little bit in this field for this master, and then in the afternoon goes over here and works in this field. No. A slave is totally committed to his master. I wrote in there, in the fullest sense and the meaning of the word. He is owned by and totally responsible to a single master. But in turn, that master is totally responsible for everything that slave needs. So Jesus ends this whole thing about worry, right? We'll start this next week. He ends this whole thing by Matthew chapter 6, verse 33, which we already covered in the priorities of Jesus. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Put that number one on your priority list. Be totally, completely committed to him. And then all these things, what things? Well, all the things that Jesus says that get in the way. God will take care of it. Why? Because you're totally committed to him. You're like Ryan said this morning. You're like Cortez. You cut off all means of retreat. You have no other option. Forward. That's it. Paul says, I press towards the mark. This one thing I do, I press towards the mark of the high calling of God. I forget the past. I forget it. I'm going this direction now. I'm going this direction. From a slave's perspective, it is full-time service, full-time obligation to a full-time master. Because he bought you. And Jesus bought us with his blood. For you were purchased with the blood of Christ. And I wrote it there. Romans 6, verse 16 to 22 tells us that we are now his bond slaves. And not in what we picture a slave. Because remember, the Bible talks about slaves. And there was that slave who so loved his master that when it was time for him to become free, he says, I don't want to go free. My master has taken such good care of me. He has been so faithful to me that I want to serve him for the rest of my life. And you know what the Bible tells us? They took that slave who was granted freedom, right? Because every 7 years you were supposed to be set free. But he said, I don't want to be free. I want to continue to serve my master. You know what they did? They took him. That's right, Gail. And they put his ear up against the door, and they took an awl, and they hammered it through his ear. And everywhere he went, he had this mark in his ear that said, I could be free, but I've chosen to give up my freedom to serve my master. And that's what Paul likens us to in Romans chapter 6. A bond slave, a love slave. Not a slave that we picture, that history has painted. And not that that's wrong. But the Bible talks about a love slave, a bond slave, because of, slavery in the Bible. Yeah, were there terrible masters? Yes, there were. Yes, there were. Were they abusive? Yes, there were. History is full of records, unfortunately. But there were those that were good, that treated their slaves with respect. And according to the Bible, those are the ones that their slaves said, I don't want to leave. Why would I want to leave? Everything I need is provided. I give myself to him, and he gives me everything. He gives himself back to me. And that's what Paul. See, you can't serve both. You can't serve God that way, and you can't serve the world that way. Because eventually the world will win out. Because you're divided. You're not focused. Your heart's in a different place. Serving two masters is likened to walking in multiple directions at the same time. Can't do it. You walk where your eye is focused. Oh, I could probably walk. I could focus on it and walk over here. I'll probably run over, hit everything, trip over everything, stumble over everything. I do that at work all the time. Walk back to my case, carrying tray mail, and someone calls my name. I turn around, I walk, and end up throwing mail all over the floor and everything else. Why? Because you can't walk in two directions at the same time. And again, let's quote Pastor Gary. You can't drive forward looking in the rearview mirror. You can't. So you can't forget. Just forget what happened. It's done. You can't change it. Focus on where you're going. Focus on where you're going. To serve two masters fully, faithfully, and completely is absolutely impossible. Now turn to the next page, and it's the one that says two, up at the top of the page, it says two masters. And that masters is translated lords. I go down to verse number 6. Now here's the two kingdoms. The world and God. All right? One is natural. It's what we see. The other one is spiritual. It's what we don't see. It's just as real as the natural. Only we can't see it. That's why this side, we walk by faith. And this side, we walk by sight. According to Proverbs, the world side is full of proud men. They're full of pride. Look what I have accomplished. Look what I have done. Look what I got. The other side is full of humble people. Why? Realizing that everything you got from God. If you got it, God gave it to you. I got what God gave me. Well, you don't have this. Well, I must not need it. Right? Then why do we want it? Why do we want it? I don't know.
You're jealous somebody else has it.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. We all do. It all grips us. Because why? We're susceptible to that spirit. Look at this. One is self-sufficient. The worldly kingdom is self-sufficient. This is what I've gotten because this is what I've done. I've worked hard. I've studied hard. And that may be true. But what you have gotten is because God has blessed you. He gave you the intelligence to go to school. This thing, you can be whatever you want to be. No, you can't. There are some people that I could never be an English teacher. I can't spell. Literally. I told you, I have a thesaurus. Why? Because I can't spell. I put question mark on my notes, and that means, Cindy, you better check the spelling because I'm nowhere near it. I have to wake her up in the middle of the night when I'm writing my notes saying, how do you spell this? And she just wakes up and goes, right back to bed. So I can't be an English teacher. I can't spell. But I can be what God wants me to be. All right, let's go on. Look, this side is the treasures of the earth, right? This is the treasures of the earth. Guess what's going to happen to them? Poof! This side, the treasures of heaven. Guess what's going to happen to them? You're going to have them forever. Because neither moth, nor thief, nor rust, nothing is going to steal them from the Father's care. Let's go on. Look, over here is nothing but corruption. Evolution is false. It's corrupting. If you don't believe me, go out and look at my car. There's rust on it. Hey, how about that storm? I don't know about where any of you were, but on my house, I just got new windows put in, right? I thought, well, they're coming tomorrow to replace them. Because, man, that's that hailstone. And and my porch was covered with hailstones.
Yeah, they're huge.
Only the side, pardon me?
They're huge.
Yeah, only about that big. And my favorite plant is hostas. I love hostas. The weirder, the better. My whole yard is full of nothing but weird hostas. I just love hostas. And they're big and they're growing. And do you know, all that hail never once took them down to the ground, but put holes in them. That's how fast. Now, while I was listening to my car being pounded and my house being pounded and my windows being pounded, and I went out in the morning and saw all my hostas with holes in them, I thought, now, what are 100-pound hailstones going to do in the end of the world when quarter takes a leaf and doesn't move it, but puts a gigantic hole in it because it's going so fast? What are 100-pound hailstones going to do? I thought, oh God, you're so merciful. Continue to protect us. All right? Thieves steal, thieves can't steal. It's a worldly heart. Why? Because that's all we're interested in. That's all we're focused on. It's the world. The other one is a spiritual heart. Not that we're not concerned about that, but our ultimate concern is the things of God. The things of God. An evil eye, single eye. A cluttered eye, an uncluttered eye. A body full of darkness, a body full of light. Now remember, you don't start out full of darkness. Jesus said that if you don't keep your eyesight focused, that light that was in you will become darker and darker and darker and darker. And how great is the darkness? Jesus is talking to his disciples. He's not talking to the unsaved because their eyes are dark. But he's talking to people that have seen the light, but then have gotten their focus broken. Thinks of nothing but the temporal, thinks of nothing but the eternal. An unstable kingdom. Talk about instability. I mean, I deliver the Wall Street Journal, so I read the front page of the Wall Street Journal because that's where all the addresses are. I mean, 1 minute we're going through the roof and setting all kind of records, and by the end of the week we've destroyed all those records because we went the other way. Only to come about next week and something happens in the world and we're through the roof. Then somebody makes a decision on something else, and by the end of the week, there it goes. All the profits gone. Talk about instability. Companies out of business overnight. With that one restaurant, $250,000 renovation didn't even last 6 months. Out, boom, gone. Down the street. Brand new equipment, state of the art, out of business. Gone. They didn't plan it, it just happened. That's the way it happened, unstable. Full of anxiety, careful for nothing. Keep what you have. That's the world system. The other one says, let's be ready to distribute what God has given to us. All right, we can't do it. We can't do it. Therefore, now let's start talking why we shouldn't worry. Let's talk about worry now from here on out. The next chapter is on worry. We're going to lay the foundation, avoiding this worldly spirit, because this is what Jesus is talking about. It's talking about not being hypocritical in our worship, not being hypocritical in our prayer life, not being hypocritical in the way we fast, not having our heart divided, not having our eyesight broken, focused, and not trying to serve two things. Jesus says, now therefore, you can avoid the worldly spirit. Make your calling and election sure. Keep your attitude right. Pastor Gary was big on talk about attitude. Remember, we did that whole series, me and him, we did a whole series, seven grumbling spirits in the wilderness. And then keep your heart pure. Keep your heart pure. Make sure your heart's right. Always. Always. That's why I always do the right thing. If somebody does you something wrong, forgive them. Even if they don't ask. You forgive them and let God deal with them. Let God deal with them. Always do what is right. And that Pastor Jim talks about it this morning. That subjective will of God. It's what all of us have to do. All of us have to do certain things. And that is, regardless. This is how you act. You don't have to, God, should I forgive Ed? Duh, no, I don't even have to ask that question. I just forgive him. Nothing. You're my example. But if you did do something, and you didn't ask for forgiveness, my job is to forgive you anyways. Forgive you anyway. All right, anything else? All right, we'll start the next thing. Avoid the worldly spirit. We'll start with that big word, therefore.